Hello and good morning, everyone. This is your team from KnowledgeE partnering with Dubai Cares to have a RewirEd Talk. The theme of today's talk is going to be developing knowledge economies, and we are delighted to join you. My name is Samantha Miles, and I'm the head of training and consulting at KnowledgeE. My background is in higher education leadership, and I've had the privilege of living overseas for about 8 years, working in the higher ed sectors of the United States, Australia, and the Middle East. Joining me today are my colleagues, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you so they can tell you a little bit about their background and what they do here at our company.
So my name is Emily Chenowski. I'm head of publishing here at KnowledgeE. I joined a year ago and actually moved to Dubai a year ago as well, with excellent timing with regards to the pandemic. My background is in research and publishing. I've been working in the publishing industry for 8 years, and prior to that I was studying for a PhD in 19th century literature in the UK.
Great. Hi, my name is Karen Anderson, and I'm the training and strategy expert for the training and consulting division here at KnowledgeE. I've been working in the Middle East for over 15 years, and Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. And I've been in Dubai now for a year, and working as a helping with the training and consulting division, both in terms of teaching, but also quality assurance and innovation. And my primary background, actually, I should say, is in library and information science, and I'm an editor of a journal, as is Emily.
Hi, my name is Cameron Cardan. I'm the founder and CEO of KnowledgeE, and I've been working in the publishing industry for more than 20 years now, covering a wide range of regions and working in different countries. Before moving to Dubai, I used to work for Oxford University Press, and then I've been living in Dubai for the past 16 years.
You're the winner. All right, guys, before we get started talking about our very juicy topic today, KnowledgeE is a company that is headquartered in Dubai. Our mission is a more knowledgeable world, and that mission really drives everything that we do. Our company has 3 divisions where we develop, discover, and disseminate knowledge. And so develop covers our training and consultancy programs. Disseminate is our publication, our publishing division. And we also discover through our e-content and digital libraries. And you guys can find out more information about our company on our website, knowledgee.com. All right, so let's go ahead and get started talking about knowledge economy ecosystem. So why don't we start with the first question, which is, what do you guys feel is the true purpose and role of education?
So who wants to start? Karen, do you want to go first?
You want me to go first? Okay, just cut me off because you know I get really excited about this. What is the true purpose and role of education? Look, I think there's actually three main areas that I would say. There's traditional roles of education, which are about pursuing knowledge and expanding knowledge in general, the world at large. In the past 50 years, a little less, education has really been focused on preparing people for careers, and it's become a professional education that allows people to develop professional skills. And so there's a tension between the two of those. But I would argue that fundamentally also what I think is the role of and purpose of education is to actually develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills that can be applied to both the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of a career. So in my mind, the best educational environments allow for all of those things. So that's my short version.
Good answer.
Yeah, very comprehensive. I mean, I'd say I agree in the most part. I think the university education in particular, it should be about the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, purely for its own sake. It's nice, you do learn valuable skills, and particularly I think the humanities have a lot of transferable soft skills in the current economies and everything. So there are great external advantages, but I think yeah, just the pursuit of knowledge in its own right is the central ethos. It's why universities were created in the first place.
What about you, Cameron?
Yeah, if I agree with all the points that were mentioned. If I just want to add a couple of thoughts around the topic, is that you've got overall an education ecosystem and you've got an educational process. So what I believe the world is that sort of education ecosystem. Since we're a toddler till we grow up, everything that we do is a learning process, and we learn by doing, by making mistakes, and we learn from the environment. So this sort of the whole world's an education ecosystem. But then you've got also education processes which enhance, especially the second part of education, which was acquiring skills and preparing for roles and jobs. And this has evolved a lot in the recent years where, as you mentioned, critical thinking, problem-based learning, and really looking at problems and finding ways to overcome these challenges is embedded into the education. There's still a long way to go, but overall, education is life, and life is education. And from the moment we're born, we're learning, and this is continuing. And it all comes down to individuals, and of course, the larger governments as well, to create the right environment for people to flourish and to learn, and that moves us to the whole concept of knowledge economies and learning-based societies.
Yeah, very nice. Listen, I totally agree with what you guys have said, and that's a really nice holistic look at education. I want to add on to Cameron's beautiful little saying there of education is life. This might sound silly to some people, but I truly believe that education is the answer to every problem that the world faces today. And I really mean that sincerely. Like, all of the problems that we face at the root, if we fortify our education systems, if more of the global population is educated in the ways like Karin had mentioned, through critical thinking, problem solving skills, empathy, all of the things that are tangible in terms of professional skills, but also, you know, as human beings, for us to be more aware of each other and the problems that we face and coming up with solutions, I really do feel that education is the answer to every problem that we have. So I think we're all working at the right company.
Yeah, I was going to say, to add on to that, I read a really interesting report by Yale University 2 days ago about they were planning their humanities postgrad and doctoral things, and some of it made for rather sad reading about how, you know, only 50% of the people who graduate with a humanities PhD from Yale actually get a job in academia. But the opening paragraph it really spoke to me. It was saying how the humanities, particularly because there's a lot of focus on sort of STEM right now, I think, in a lot of governments around the world. But Yale was really pushing the humanities, saying it gives you the critical skills to not only function in the world as a sort of a contributing member of society, but to become a social leader, to engage with people on a daily basis. And they're saying, you know, education is the only way you can really achieve that. It's a great report, actually. Everyone should read it if you can dig it out online.
No, very valuable point. I just want to circle back on what you both mentioned, and it's education is not just the technical skills and requirements and the STEM that you mentioned. It's also, you know, the soft skills and the sort of the characteristics, like empathy was imagine like if we all had a empathetic view on the world, how a lot of problems will go away and how a lot of challenges would be resolved. So these are really, really important points that, you know, we can just talk on for hours about them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we don't talk on for hours. Let me ask our next question, which is, how do we feel that education can promote sustainable economic development? Yeah, go for it, Karin.
So I feel really strongly about this, and it actually builds on everything that we just said. So my perspective on sustainable economic development, there's what we can think about it really with the focus on the economic development, or we can think about it in terms of the larger view around what the UN calls the Sustainable Development Goals, which include everything from economic development to public health to education to innovation to equality and justice, right? So all of those things, they're complex problems, right? They're not one solution. You need people doing science to come up with better solutions to help address environmental issues, right? But you also need people to develop those critical thinking skills to be able to solve the problems. You need people with historical understanding of the world, humanities, and also perspectives that humanities give us in order to actually look at us as a social situation and not just some technical atomistic problem that we're trying to solve, like getting a rocket into space or something. And you also need to be able to work with people and work with change, right? So in order to be sustainable, part of that is also is adapting to change, and we're constantly evolving, right? So because sustainable economic development isn't, if it was just economic development, that's growth, and that's all going in one way, and that's only by a measure of, perhaps economic prosperity. But the sustainable part says there are other issues that have value, and trying to figure out how to incorporate the value of everything requires knowledge and experience with all of these things. And to build on the last thing that you said, Cameron, when you were again talking about also empathy and things, is the experience of being in an educational environment. We often just talk about education, right? And there's like, okay, I can take a class. But when you're in also a collective educational environment where you have fellow students, or you're on a campus, whether it's virtual or in person, you have the experience of interpersonal interactions that develop those skills of being able to work with different people from different perspectives. Like, even though we all love education, we love it for different reasons, and understanding those reasons, as I heard you guys all this morning, I'm realizing that's part of it. Is the education environment helps us understand how people are different and work on developing solutions for development that actually are equitable and just based on the diversity of our experiences.
No, absolutely. And I think that it circles back to what we mentioned in a previous question, that at the foundation of any sustainable development program lies education. And that education is the way to be able to get generations ready for solving these problems. And not just in schools, but also when you're talking about educating the general public around climate change and the environment. This is also a different level of education. And then it's like really the education on the required skills in order to solve these problems. So I think, to summarize all of that, education is key in sustainable development for any country, any nation, and the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say I think it's the question of sustainability more than anything else. It is a bit like that whole, you give a man a fish versus you train him how to fish. It is that bringing up of the children, because I think a lot of education right now does tend to center on higher education, but if you're not sort of helping develop the raw materials of children as they come up and get ready for higher education, you end up with a whole load of people who basically go to university and don't really achieve very much. So I think it's sort of working on the basic foundations as well is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just one of the things that I always think about when we talk about sustainable economic development, if we think about the economy, in more kind of traditional terms, you think, okay, well, what drives an economy? It's the assets of that nation, right? So we think about countries that have, maybe they're rich in natural resources, and that's what's promoted them to economic prosperity. Maybe they're located geographically in a place that is a meeting point for trade routes and things like this. But if we think about today's modern society, the assets of a nation are its people. And I think that when we think about the role that education plays in that economic development, if you drill down to the bottom of it, people are your assets. And when you have people who are problem solvers, who are innovators, and I'm talking about from across all levels, you know, one of the things that I really admire are places that put emphasis not only on higher education, but also on technical training and you know, giving opportunities for folks across ranges to contribute to that society in a meaningful way. And so I think when we really think about education as being a primary driver of human capital for a country, then you can really see, in addition to everything that you guys said, just tying it together, you know, people are those assets and education develops your people.
And I'm just so glad that you mentioned technical and vocational types of education, because it's a huge piece that I think has gotten lost in the last 20 years. There are a number of countries that, even at the high school level, they integrate local business with the high school, and students are already learning. Japan, Germany, they've done this, I know from experience, but and I think that we've been in this pursuit of everybody should get a university degree. Well, maybe not. And like you said, the country's huge, and validating and supporting and developing all types of education is I think really important. So thank you for mentioning that.
Ah, my pleasure. All right, our next question. What role does publication and scholarly output play in knowledge economies?
I'll start with that one then. I think it's I mean, obviously I come from an academic background, so on a personal level, there's no greater feeling than being published and seeing your name in print. I mean, it's a real kick, like I can't deny that. But on a sort of a more tangible sort of national level, I think there's a huge credibility element to this. You know, if there's every country in the world right now wants to improve its higher education. Everyone wants to be moving up the rankings. Everyone would like to be at the top of the rankings for national sort of education performance, because it makes your country more reputable. And when your country's more reputable, you get more academics coming in, and you get more other industries coming in, because you have this huge mark of credibility being, you know, a strong scholarly output. So I think from an overall national level, it's helps you maximize your research, increases global credibility, and also then sort of going back to the sort of more micro level, is the more publications that you have that are high quality, the more venues and avenues that your academic authors have to publish. And that's particularly important for countries where English isn't the first language, because rightly or wrongly, currently English is predominantly the language of academia, and if you're not a native English speaker, it can be much harder. It's a huge barrier to get over to publish if you're constantly having to translate or think in another language. So I recently published something half in French, and as I mentioned to Karen, I'm ashamed to say there were a lot of typos in there, because I really don't speak French, and I can only imagine how much harder it would have been if I'd had to write the whole thing in French and had to write everything in a foreign language. So developing your national publishing ecosystem, particularly for academic publishing, in a native language is a huge, huge bonus for your country's authors, as well as the sort of the potential to develop greater international reputation as well.
Can I just build off of what Emily said, because the global credibility, relating that back to our knowledge economy, our human assets, we are global, right? And part of that is being able to participate in the global conversation of science as well as industry. And so while academia, we think, well, you know, it's academia and they're publishing for each other. But what it does is it gets a nation involved in the global conversation of the development of that area of knowledge, or that area of science, or that area of industry. And so that not only does that global credibility, as Emily said, bring in more opportunities for the authors of that country, and you said industry comes in, but again, that credibility really builds foreign direct investment and all kinds of opportunities that if outsiders, and it's not just investment in the country, it's an ability to engage anywhere, and people say, okay, yeah, you can play with us, sure.
International collaboration, yeah. Circling back on what was mentioned, in addition to being a measure for academic output and a country's scientific performance. So if we go back to the basic of the purpose of scholarly communication was basically a means for scientists and scholars to be able to communicate to each other and share that knowledge with other scholars. Now, we talked, Karen talked about dissemination and sharing it with the world, and I just want to add on that. So one point is sharing it with the world. So every researcher in every country, they have a voice and they can share their findings with the world, and which could lead to further scholarly discoveries. But in addition, absolutely, but in addition to that, it has two other purposes. One is to really fact-based information rather than just rumors. And today we have the whole notion of fake news and false information being shared. So really, it shows the importance of scholarly academic content to be shared with the world, but also making it simple and simplifying it in a way that you have more people reading it and more people access to it, because there's benefit in understanding and learning, and it's not just unique to other scholars. It should be made available in a way that everyone can use it.
Cameron, that's such a lovely point, and I really love the way that you looped back to what we were talking about how education, in the beginning of our conversation, what the purpose goes. And ladies, I really love how you had mentioned industry in both of your points, because that leads me really nicely into my next question, which is essentially, what are the benefits and what are the challenges of that interface between governments, industry, and higher education, universities, or the education sector at a whole? What do we see as the primary factors there?
I used to be the one to start all the time, but I obviously had the one with the most powerful, the most opinionated person in this room. So, look, in the short version, the advantages of working together are because we all actually need each other. We all build on each other's stuff, right? So you need a way to turn knowledge into business. Business needs the knowledge. Government needs to support and regulate in order to make things equitable and stuff like that. The problem is that each of these industries, or each of these sectors, government, education, and industry, all have different priorities with different objectives and different ways of working. So, you've got a profit motive in one place, you've got civil service and/or / politics in another place, and you have pursuit of knowledge in another place. So if I spend too much time with industry and give up too much of the profit motive, I may be missing out key pieces of knowledge because they're not, I can't turn them into a product or a service, whereas the government might say, okay, well, this piece of knowledge, we're not going to pursue that because that doesn't fit with this idea of how our policies are going to look or something. And so it's really important to keep them separated, but in partnership. And I think that the partnership is, I'm not really sure what the right metaphor is, but it's not, I don't personally feel it's like a marriage. Like it's more like a business partnership, because we can't be stuck with each other. We need to be independent. And even in a marriage or a family, we all need our own independence, even if we did use that metaphor. So I think there's no way to say there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it. There's to me, the best way to do those kinds of collaborations is to do it with your eyes wide open and stayed open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I just want to add to the points that Karen mentioned. So it's a very complicated and complex relationship between these sort of three stakeholders. You've got governments funding research and academia, that academia could potentially start the new business ideas that can turn into products or that fuel the industry. At the same time, academia can help with social, economical, environmental challenges. They are the ones that are fueling the workforce of the future. So the skills required for industry predominantly come from, of course, the universities and the vocational educational areas. So these are already interlinked, but as you mentioned, in the ideal scenario, there needs to be a closer collaboration, a closer, more intuitive sort of relationship between all three in order to have better results. Because as you mentioned, like they each have their own individual motivations, and the closer that these, there's no solution that can really be, but I definitely believe that a lot of countries can improve on this front, and the better, the more. I think what you said, Karen, about with eyes open, so a more informed and knowing the results and the consequences, and having better informed relationships will definitely enhance countries and the world overall by having a better relationship between these stakeholders.
And I think developing on that, one of the, going back to the challenges rather than the benefits element, is I think one of the challenges right now is that governments get advised, or they see what other people are doing and they get advised by someone who says, for example, it's all about engineering, we need engineers, we don't want to fund any other subject. So I think one of the big challenges is that a lot of governments right now, and increasingly, they're getting quite blinkered and they're getting very focused on industry and physical developments, and are neglecting the sort of the elements that we discussed before, the sort of the soft skills, but also the human skills, human engagement, critical thinking, empathy, and all of those elements that I'm not saying you don't necessarily get educated in them when you do an engineering degree, but they're perhaps not prioritized to the extent that they might be in some of the social sciences and humanities, which are then very much you're facing reduced funding, and that there is the risk that in sort of 10 years or so, 20 years, you end up with an economy where you're bereft of people with soft skills that actually are just as vital as the hard sciences and medicine and engineering and all of these other elements that are perceived as more valuable right now.
I don't want to go off on a totally different track. I just want to put a marker there to say what that reminds me of that we haven't also talked about, but I just want to mention is important, is the importance of discussing ethics, which is really on that social level, is that when we oftentimes can be very focused in our pursuit of a solution or a new product or profit, and that there are ethics to everything. There's ethics to engineering, there's ethics to medicine, there's ethics to data, and particularly in the knowledge economy, we see that all the time, is like, what is the ethics of privacy or responsibility do we have to the community? No answer, and it's not really, I just wanted to make sure it had a little spot in the conversation.
No, I'm glad you made sure that it had a spot, Karen. And I just want to circle back to, this whole point of that you had said in the very beginning, and Cameron had echoed, which is to go into the relationship with open eyes. And I think that is really challenging. Collaboration in and of itself is challenging. And I think that one of the things that we can look to for the industries, the nations that have really done this successfully, it's more than just having open eyes. It's having leadership across the three sectors that drives this vision and sets that culture. If we were to take, for example, healthcare, and we look at the most successful teaching hospitals, they partner with universities. They are treating patients and they are doing research and they're innovating. And so by doing all of those three things, you have these hubs for excellence in certain areas. And I think another thing that is an interesting idea around this is picking areas where you can excel and have excellence. when we see research centers, teaching hospitals, universities, industry innovators, they pick an area and they say, this is what we want to focus on, and we want to do it better than anyone else in the world. And when we talk about opportunities for us to contribute to a global society, not everybody has to do the same thing. Not everybody should be focused on curing cancer. There's lots of problems that this world has. So like, let's pick areas that we can really contribute to the world and develop those centers of excellence. And really, if you have leaders that drive that vision and support that, I think it really helps to set everybody up for success and make the world a better place.
Yes, Samantha, you mentioned a couple of really key points over here. And it's circling back to what we've been talking about, having open eyes when it goes about this relationship. And Emily also talked about the whole ethical side and the humanities side of it. So, a thought came to my mind that really one of the drivers of making this relationship valuable is really the purpose and shifting that intention that we mentioned, that one is profit, one is like, I think if we have that intention of solving problems, serving humanity, adding value, and really having that intention, having that goal in mind of serving a purpose, that could bring all these three different areas together. And Sam, you mentioned leadership, and so we're based in Dubai, and Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, in one of his books I saw highlighting the need for governments to serve people, and by serving people and putting people at the front, solves a lot of challenges in many countries. And I think in this sort of scenario, putting people in the center, putting the world in the center, and really serving a purpose can work as a catalyzer to enhance this complex relationship.
Super well said. Thank you, Cameron. All right, guys, we have been talking for quite a while. We're almost on 30 minutes now. So I think, why don't we wrap up with one final question, which is, what do you think the future of global education is going to look like?
Ooh, it's a big question.
No, that's why I saved it till the end.
I just need to look into my crystal ball and I can give you the answer.
So there's I can pull that question apart. What will the future look like? What do I think it should look like? What would I like it to look like? I mean, I think those are different questions. I think the conversation that we've been having today, I think all of us, you can pull out of each of these, our answers to these questions, some of what we think education generally should look like. But in terms of the future of global education, in a technical sense, I think there are trends of where people are participating. There are educational opportunities that are online, which allow a lot of global mobility, right? In terms of people participating in different educational environments all over the world. And I imagine that this is going to continually expand, which actually brings me back to the point that you, Sam, made in regards to identifying areas that your nation or your institution can be in excellence, and what a point you made, Emily, about the credibility globally of your institution and your research, is that those mechanisms for establishing credibility and focusing your vision and not trying to be everything to everybody, as the global online spread of everybody, the sort of great melting pot or, salad that we are these days, develops, the importance of establishing our identity in particular areas and our credibility is going to be something that educational institutions and nations are going to want to think about. So I feel like that's probably a good place to stop for me.
I would say, so given you've taken the sort of the national level, I'll work on the more individual level. I think it's probably going to be a lot more open and a lot less elitist. Education has historically, it's evolved from the cliched ivory tower concept that is what it was. You know, even when you were learning practical skills like medicine, there were the best places to go. There were the only places to go. You had Edinburgh University and all the European schools back in the day. And education has historically been closed. It's been closed to people who are more intelligent or who've had more money, and for whatever reason. Whereas I think now, particularly with the big open access drive and the internet, has made a huge change. Particularly, I'd say it's probably the one real bright spot from the pandemic over the past year is just the wealth of educational material that is now available online. I was running an online lecture last night, a literature lecture with people. We had people from Australia, the US, Iran, Iraq, and all across Europe, everyone dialing in to listen to this lecture. And it would have been possible 2 years ago, but no one would have thought to have done it, really. And I think that trend is here to stay. And I think that's like I said, I think it's the one bright spot from the past year has been this huge opening up of education generally.
Yeah, I think circling back to all the conversations that we've had and the changes that are happening, I think something that has already started, especially with the kids, is having a problem-based solving approach to education and taking challenges and answering those challenges. It's like in the future is not I want to be an engineer, I want to be a mathematician. It's more like, okay, I want to solve this problem, I want to overcome this challenge. It is somehow started in the education system. We see it in the higher education system with a whole multidisciplinary approach in really overcoming complex challenges that we face in today's world. So I think we will see more and more of that. The use of technology and what we've learned with the recent pandemic and the whole point of more global inclusion is that not only will have more global inclusion and a wider spread of various education systems, but also an expanded education system to beyond universities, and where various skills can be learned and acquired in different settings. So this whole notion of a sort of a learning society, more a learning world where skills are available to anyone who wants to acquire it. So the education is available everywhere. And another trend that we have already started seeing with the use of technology is the involvement of, and it circles back to the previous point as well, that education is not exclusive to certain universities. You have more and more organizations and corporations and institutions becoming involved in that education process. And I think overall we're moving to a more global integration and more global availability of not just education, but knowledge overall. So information and knowledge at everyone's fingertips.
Yeah, really well said. So I think one of the things that I always think about when I talk about this topic is the role of the educator and what's going to happen with technology. You know, if we think about technology, right, 20 years ago, we had no idea we were going to have little computers in our hands all the time with our smartphones. And I'm going to geek out on you for a second here because one of my favorite books of all time is Ready Player One. And it's this sci-fi book that's set in the not too distant future. And in this world, everybody kind of logs into the internet using these immersion lenses and things like this. But one of my favorite parts of the book is the education system that they talk about in the book. Now, this isn't a main part of the plot line, but I'm a nerd, so I really focused in on it. And a lot of these kids go to school using these immersion goggles. And, you know, if they're learning about volcanoes, the immersion takes them to the side of a volcano. If they're learning about ancient Rome, they go to ancient Rome. They go inside the atoms, you know, and so it's this totally immersive education process for them. And I mean, listen, I wouldn't be surprised if 20 years from now, that's how young people experienced education, because we don't know where technology is going to go. And I think that would be amazing. But I think the important point here is what is the role of the educator with that technology? Because technology is going to continue to advance at an exponential rate. And so when we think about what is the role of an educator, I don't think we will ever reach the point where AI is going to replace humans as educators, right? Because just like what we've talked about, problem solving skills, identifying not what do I want to be, but what problem do I want to solve when I grow up. And it's the educator's job to bring that humanity to education. And we are no longer disseminators of information. You know, it's not a cup pouring liquid from me into the student. As an educator, you are a facilitator of knowledge. And one of the things that really excites me about what's going on globally is how many educators, all the way from K through 12 into tertiary education, are reorienting the way that they teach to become facilitators of knowledge as opposed to sages on the stage. And I think that's really exciting. And I think about when we think about the future of education, combining this new mentality of you know, teaching as facilitators of knowledge with technology, the future is going to be bright. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes.
Fantastic. That was fantastically well said. I want to actually just bring one, I have to have one more word. So we talked about facts. We talked about the educator and the role as facilitating that knowledge, but I would also argue it brings me back to, as a social science researcher and editor of a social science journal, we often in science, we organize our papers into findings, what are the facts, and discussion, what do they mean? And when you talk about the educator as a facilitator, I pull that back a little bit to also consider them the meaning maker, helping students make meaning out of the facts that they're getting taught, which leads us to what Cameron was saying, is from that meaning, finding a sense of purpose that drives it behind the whole thing.
What a beauty. That should go into a quote bubble. All right, guys, why don't we do this? I think, Karin, you did a really nice job of synthesizing. What are your key takeaways from this conversation? And that's how we'll wrap up. We talked about a lot of stuff. Are there any things that stand out in your mind as a key takeaway? If we were going to put this on an exam for our students, what would we quiz them on?
Oh, that's different than where you started, because I have my key takeaways, and then versus an exam, like I don't like the exam. All right, so let me tell you what I learned from our conversation, my conversation with the three of you. What I learned, or what I was reminded, was how four people who care about the same theoretically small niche in the world actually have so many different perspectives and coming at it from so many different angles that we all brought something different to the table. And what I ended up with as a result of our conversation is a much broader view of what my answers to these questions would be. So thank you guys. That to me expanded my world, and I learned something today. So it's always a good day when you learn something new.
All part of the education process.
What part? Are you asking me a question?
I said it's all part of that education
all
process.
Part, yes, it's all part.
Education is life, life is education.
That's it. I think we need to change our tagline.
Yeah.
KnowledgeE, life is education.
And education starts with an E as well. So it fits very well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Cameron or Emily, do either of you, I think it's pretty hard to top what Karin just said. Do either of you have anything that you want to add to wrap up the conversation?
No, I mean, I have to say I agree with Karin. It's always great having these conversations. I think it's really important that we have them, and also it's great that the organisation is having them and allowing us to participate, because they are so helpful. Even though we all work in the same company, and we still have completely different views about so much, that it really highlights the value of these sort of collaborative engagements.
Yeah. Very nice.
Well, there's nothing from my side, so yeah, I think we covered all the main points during the conversation. So.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for taking time this morning to have this conversation. It was really fruitful. I definitely enjoyed it. And I think we will sign out by saying that RewirEd Talks, because education is everyone's business. All right. Bye, guys. See you soon.